الهيدروجين بالقارة الإفريقية. نرحب بكم ونشكركم على المجيء وعلى المشاركة في هذا المؤتمر الذي استمر أمس، واليوم هو اليوم الثاني والأخير. وشكلت مداخلات وجلسات أمس فرصة ثمينة للنقاش حول أفضل الخيارات لتسريع تمويل المشاريع في موريتانيا وفي القارة الإفريقية، وكانت المداخلات من مستوى عالي، كما هو التمثيل أيضا سواء فيما يتعلق بممثلي الحكومات المهتمة، وخاصة دول مجموعة التحالف الإفريقي للهيدروجين الأخضر، الدول الست التي تضم إلى جانب موريتانيا جنوب أفريقيا، ناميبيا، كينيا، المغرب ومصر، أو سواء فيما يتعلق بممثلي الشركات العاملة التي وقعت مشاريع هنا في موريتانيا والتي وصل عددها إلى 4. نشكركم جزيل الشكر ونرحب بكم مجددا في هذا اليوم الثاني. وستكون جلسات اليوم 3 جلسات. ستكون الأولى بإدارة السيدة إيناس ماركيز، وستكون حول تصميم الشروط المالية الملائمة للغرض. كما ستكون الجلسة الثانية حول تحقيق الفوائد الاجتماعية والاقتصادية من الاقتصاد الناشئ للهيدروجين الأخضر. والجلسة الأخيرة ستكون حول محاولة للإجابة على التساؤل: كيف يمكن لدول التحالف التحالف الإفريقي للهيدروجين الأخضر من تسريع التمويل؟ وسنحاول إلقاء نظرة على عوامل التمكين الرئيسية. Mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue et merci d'être parmi nous pour participer à ce forum de haut niveau portant sur la thématique qui intéresse non seulement la Mauritanie, mais les pays et le continent africain en général, c'est-à-dire comment trouver les meilleures options et les meilleurs mécanismes pour accélérer le financement des projets d'hydrogène. Nous sommes donc honorés de vous accueillir ici pour discuter de cette problématique-là et trouver les meilleures options et les meilleures voies pour enfin trouver, finaliser, concrétiser ces projets-là. Les sessions d'hier étaient des sessions de haut niveau, ainsi qu'à la présence. Nous remercions les représentants des gouvernements, les représentants des sociétés, du secteur privé, des compagnies ayant signé des contrats ou des conventions de développement de projets d'hydrogène ici en Mauritanie. Et nous remercions les représentants des pays membres de l'AGA, l'Alliance africaine de l'hydrogène vert, à rappeler qu'ils sont au nombre de 6, aux côtés de la Mauritanie, l'Afrique du Sud, la Namibie, le Kenya, le Maroc et l'Égypte. Et nous remercions tous les représentants des pays présents avec nous. Aujourd'hui, nous allons avoir, c'est une courte journée, vendredi, nous allons avoir 3 sessions. La première va porter sur comment concevoir les termes fiscaux adaptés. Ce sera sous la présidence, comme facilitateur, Madame Inès Marquez. Deuxième session, ce sera pour répondre à la question comment tirer les avantages socio-économiques de l'économie de l'hydrogène vert. Et la troisième et la dernière, comment les pays membres de l'AGA peuvent accélérer le financement. Et nous allons avoir un aperçu sur le regard sur les principaux catalyseurs de ces mécanismes et ces options. Nous vous remercions encore une fois et j'appelle Madame Inès à commencer sans tarder la première session de cette deuxième et dernière journée. Merci beaucoup. You, Inès. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Great to see so many of you here today. We will kick off straight away the session on designing fit-for-purpose fiscal terms, and I welcome all our panelists to the stage. So while our esteemed panelists join us, perhaps just to share that this session will consider what is the best appropriate mix of incentives, profits, and taxes that can both incentivize investment and also ensure that government gets a fair share in the long term. We will also discuss some of the progress and challenges in developing legislation in fiscal terms for green hydrogen projects and draw some lessons from Mauritania, Egypt, Namibia, among other countries. We really hope we have a fantastic panel of experts, but there's also a lot of expertise in the room. So I hope that we can really share some lessons here in this very emerging industry. And feel free to raise your hands and let me know if you have questions during the discussion. We have, for instance, just touched on issues like shared infrastructure quite a lot in the last day, so I hope that we'll get some time to dig a little bit deeper into that and learn from some of the efforts to develop legislation here in Mauritania and beyond to see what are some of the emerging lessons. So we at the Green Hydrogen Organization have been following the efforts to develop legislation and fiscal regimes, trying to understand what are some of the key terms that are contained in the MOUs, in the framework agreements that have been announced and signed, global conventions. And a key question that we have been grappling with is exactly this: how do we land this appropriate mix of incentives and taxes? And I thought that Minister Saleh really addressed this issue head on yesterday when he said that we need to strike the balance between the need to ensure benefit for governments and the need to attract investors. Where to put the cursor is the question, which is not an easy question to answer as we don't have a precedent. And I think that's the key question, or key issue that we keep hearing from governments. We don't have benchmarks. There's little examples to refer to, which gives governments less confident in signing off on the fiscal terms. So that's one of the issues that we're here to talk about. We also have quite a lot of experience from the extractive industries where there's been challenges with lack of transparency, civil society scrutiny of fiscal terms of agreements that have been signed decades ago. And I think that I speak on behalf of many of us when I say that we want to build an industry which is based on trust and common understanding that host governments, communities, and the private sector get a fair share of the profits. And this is, I think, particularly important for projects that are developed and hosted by developing countries. Without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists. We have Clément Fondoufe from Latimer Watkins. He's the global co-chair of the Africa practice. We have Oliver Meledo, who's a partner at Mayer Brown. We had Ahmed Hafez, who's section manager for green hydrogen projects in the Ministry of Electricity and Renewable Energy of Egypt. And last but not least, Margaret Mutchler, who's is wearing two hats, both VP Project Development Africa at CWP and chairperson of the Namibia Green Hydrogen Association. So to kick off, I would like to ask you, Clément, you have decades of experience advising governments in Africa, and I was wondering if you could maybe share a bit of sort of your insights around what would this appropriate mix look like in terms of fiscal incentives and terms for green hydrogen projects, particularly in an Africa context.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to the Green Hydrogen Organization for hosting us, and thank you very much to the Africa Green Hydrogen Alliance for inviting me to participate in this and to share my thoughts and perspectives. Now, I spend a lot of time traveling around the continent. As Ines said, I co-head the Africa practice at Latham & Watkins. We are a large global firm, and I specifically focus on the extractive industries. I would say largely oil and gas. And the issues that are being discussed here today are neither new nor specific to Mauritania. They have been encountered by other African countries, and they have been able to overcome these difficulties by finding an appropriate balance between what people generally refer to as the government take and what others view as the profit on behalf of the foreign investors. Obviously, the investors are going to have to put a lot of equity and stretch and leverage their balance sheets to be able to do these projects. It is not a charitable project. They expect to make a profit and a return on their investment, and governments should recognize that. On the part of the government, there is an expectation of economic development, transformation of the economy, diversification, growth. I think the minister was quite eloquent yesterday in his characterization of all of this. I think in one word he said industrialization. So how you balance that in the contract is quite important. And there is another reason why this is important. Very often we hear governments changing the rules of the game in the middle of a project. And that is a risk for the sponsors, it is a risk for the lenders, and many other stakeholders. And therefore, finding that right balance that addresses the concerns of the respective participants, i.e. the government and the foreign investors, is very important. Because when you have that right balance, you are in a win-win situation, and you avoid a scenario where governments will feel years down the road that they are not deriving the appropriate benefits from the project. And that will lead to a temptation to want to change either the rules or the fiscal regime in order to rebalance from their perspective the project. And obviously, that puts the project sponsors in an uncomfortable situation, because what was modeled financially to raise the debt or even to be able to take their FID, those rules have changed. And so you look at a range of measures, corporate income tax, customs revenues, and all these things. Do you grant tax holidays? Do you significantly reduce the tax levies? Now, you will hear, as the Mauritanian government, a lot of foreign advisors and maybe some foreign governments tell you, oh, you should focus on increasing your tax revenues, etc., etc. But make no mistake, right? The IRA in the US is a tax benefit, right? And why are they doing it? It is because they feel they need to incentivize the development of these projects. And from the perspective of the government of Mauritania, as the minister said, he's looking at industrializing the economy of the country, because that will provide them with the leverage for economic growth, for diversification of the economy, for transformation of the sector. You'll have downstream industries grow and develop in the country. Without the investment by the developers from the very beginning, this ain't happening, right? So you need to recognize that and then figure out whether the government needs to recalibrate its thinking around taxes, customs duties, what people generally refer to as the government take, what level is appropriate for the government, because there are also political considerations. The government cannot have a zero tax project, right? There will be some level of revenue that is needed by the government to be able to develop these projects. To sell and obtain popular buy-in, the government has to go to parliament for the hydrogen code to be approved. The government has to go to parliament for the global conventions to be approved. And there will be tough discussions around what is coming into the public revenue, into the public treasury by way of revenues generated by these projects. So I think I don't want to monopolize the microphone, but I hope I have been able to lay out in broad terms what the balance is and why you need that balance for these projects to happen. I can come back to it later on if there are more specific questions, but I also give others on the panel the opportunity to speak.
Fantastic, thank you for that, for setting the scene out like that, and I'm sure there will be more questions. And yeah, fully agree that it's so important to get this right early on, and the challenge is that, yeah, you have the IRA and you have, you know, clearly there's a need at the moment for a lot of financial incentives to get the industry off the ground. But in the long term, let's say if you're signing an agreement that's 40 years, you know, what does it look like further down the line, and what are mechanisms to make sure that when, you know, to allow governments to sort of capture a share of the upside, you know, in the long term. So yeah, I would love to hear from you, Olivier. You also, of course, have a lot of experience working on these issues, and are also working on the code here in Mauritania, which we look forward to hearing more about throughout the discussion. But yeah, I was wondering also from your point of view, if you had any reflections on how to get this mix right.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the AGA to inviting me to speak today. Thank you for the audience for being around, and I would like to pay a tribute to the government of Mauritania for launching this initiative, which can be a game changer for the Mauritanian economy and for the region generally. As you've just mentioned, we've been appointed in a role of advisors to the government in the structuring of those projects, and it's a high challenge for us. It's a challenge for everyone because it's a brand new industry. We've been looking at the figures yesterday, they are massive. And so with no need to reinvent the wheel in terms of the basics of project finance, I think we have to factor and figure out how to best develop these projects in the context of non-structured by all stakeholders, including financiers. So I would endorse the speech of my colleague Clément just now. Tax is a very important tool, but it needs to be manipulated with high caution. The ministry yesterday made it very clear that the government's not looking after immediate money out of these projects, but rather speed up the development and industrialize this country. There are many infrastructures that are involved in these projects, and not all of them benefiting to the production of hydrogen, but as the case may be, surplus of electricity can be sold to the grid, desalinized water can become a new resource as well for the benefit of the country and the people. So there are various side aspects in terms of developing this country, and so manipulating the tax tool is something very important to think about. And as the ministry put it yesterday, I mean, a tax structure and benefits is different from an investment return. And so it's very easy in many projects, and we know that in the oil and gas industry, to start leaving money when the cash flow have not yet arrived. We've seen many structures such as bonuses and other sort of tax streams, but we do not believe this is appropriate. And the appropriate tool is to maximize the development of the project, secure the cash flows through long-term offtake contracts. We talked a lot about them yesterday. And then try to find the right cursor in taking into account the magnitude of those projects. So the oil and gas industry is already very accommodated with many of those instruments, including the state participation, national companies participation, as the case may be carrying the participation. But then, of course, it comes to repayment one day, and the rates that will be available for those carry to be put in place if at all an investment in equity is considered by government. Another way of looking at things is taking a wide approach in terms of what can be done with the cash flows and generating royalties, as the case may be, to the benefit of the government. So these sort of instruments can be implemented on purpose and at the right time. This project will be developed over years, and the very first cash revenues will not come before years. So I think there is an alignment across the board that there's no need to be immediate tax levy or customs levy, but rather trying to make the government of Mauritania in a win-win position as cash flow arrives.
Thank you. That's a perfect segue also to Ahmed, and it'll be really interesting to hear from you, Ahmed. What are some of the financial incentives that you are considering, and the kind of issues that come up in your negotiations with various project developers in Egypt?
Good morning, everyone. First, I would like to thank His Excellency Saleh to hosting this forum, and this good opportunity to meet with my colleagues and AGA members. For green hydrogen projects, as you know, during the COP27, we signed nine binding framework agreement with the developer, and all of them talking about the incentives in Egypt. This issue have a great importance in Egypt. I would like to inform you this is being studied under the supervision of the Prime Minister personally, and to prepare a package of the financial and taxes incentives for green hydrogen project. This soon will be announced, and I promise you all of this actually will be satisfactory for all developers.
Thank you. And I'll ask Margaret in a moment, but while I'm just looking out here, do feel free to raise your hand if you have specific questions about these issues that are being raised. You don't want to wait until the end for questions on these issues, so just give me a little signal. Margaret, so our CEO Jonas loves saying
the next thing is, I think I'm there's a reason maybe why I'm on this panel, because I'm the only engineer, I think, on this panel. Yes, and it's a risk when engineers start talking about fiscal terms, or maybe not. Maybe that's what's required. So let me give you the development aspect. So the one, when you read literature and you do your MBA studies, there's very much what Clement have said. You know, it is on the one side attracting investors by having a sustainable and certain regime for with a number of questions, and some of them actually provide answers that are trade-offs with So the principle question about international market. So we need to remain competitive.
Devons être très compétitifs.
There's something to be said for sharing upside on the one hand, but also making sure that there's a favorable downside regime in terms of making sure the projects are sustainable and they do ride out the rough waters or the downtimes and don't just go belly up. We need to look at incentives to reward, and coming back to the Minister Salih's discussion yesterday or speech yesterday, we believe in incentives to actually reward localization and developers contributing to the government meeting its own government goals. And then the last thing, which we really are very passionate about, is just really what does just transition mean in a fiscal regime? How do we contribute as government and developer partners to actually reward the absolute direct receptors of the projects that we develop?
There are people in the room who have any comments or questions to what has been said so far. If not, I'll jump in with my own points, but I'll keep an eye out for people who want to come in. So I had two questions actually that I will sort of throw out to you, especially to our lawyers. So two things we also often get questions around is state participation. I think that was mentioned during the discussions yesterday as well. How does that, is that one way of securing sort of government benefits to have states participate in projects? If so, how to finance that? Are there downsides to that? And also royalties, we get that question very much. Is that something that you think applies for 2020 production of green hydrogen? I'll throw it out and see if that's... anyone on the panel wants to address that. Yeah, thank you.
So I think someone said yesterday that it is important for us to look at analogies with several industries, and one of them in particular is the LNG industry. Now, and I say that because the comparison is quite appropriate. One, in terms of the size and scale of the financing needed. I think we were told yesterday by Jonas that, just roughly speaking, every 1 gigawatt of power is equal to $1 billion US. So if you just put these projects into phases and you say the first phase is 10 gigawatts, that is 10 billion. But that amount does not even take into account the infrastructure and other things that you need to add on to that. So roughly 15 billion. So the simple way to look at state participation is as follows. Let us say the state wants to have a 10 or 15% participation in a project. And I know this is politically important because there is an expectation that you're developing a project in the country, the state should be seen to be participating in the project. Now, 10 to 15% of that $10 billion is approximately, let's leave it at 10%, that's $1 billion of equity that the state needs to, that's the state's portion. And if you break it down into the debt to equity ratio, roughly speaking, of say 70-30 maybe, that's 10% of 3 billion, which is 300 million that the state has to come up with. And then looking further down the line at the lender's requirements, there will be a need for a completion guarantee or a debt service undertaking of 10% of 7 billion, right? So it is not easy. And when you look at these projects, you realize that the state has to make a choice. If they really have $300 million, is it worth putting it into this project, or should they be using it to develop schools and roads and public health facilities, et cetera, et cetera? Because remember, the state has multiple hats it wears in these projects. It is the regulator, it is the grantor of the concession, and then, of course, if you add on to that the equity role. And typically what we find is that the states cannot really come up with this portion of the equity. And they then look for a carry arrangement where they require the international developers to pay on behalf of the state, subject to some type of reimbursement arrangement from the revenues of the project when they start being generated. And of course, it's not just the principal, it's the principal plus interest. And then you find out that maybe for the next 15 to 20 years of the project, the state is not really getting anything because that money is going to reimburse the foreign investors for the amount that they paid upfront for the state, right? And so I don't like to put it in terms of right versus wrong, but I think it is important that states understand the issues that will arise as a result of a state participation. And I know that there is a political, perhaps, imperative to be seen, it's an election year, elections around the corner, to be actively involved at the state and to claim ownership of a portion of these projects. But that is the question for the state. Do I remain a regulator, or do I take an equity participation in the project with all that comes with equity participation? But I'm sure, Olivier, you probably have something else.
That's funny because we had this conversation before with Clément and we are pretty much in alignment. Clément just did the math, and the math just proved that it's going to be very costly for the government to take equity, although there is, of course, a political flavor into that. That needs to be taken into account, and the state knows how it works, especially in Mauritania, enjoying this track record in the oil and gas industry. So carry participation and being part of the project is something that the state knows, and the state already has a sort of a sense of how to best regulate and oversee those projects with his hat as regulator, as Clément mentioned, which can be very strong, depending on what the law says, and we'll come into that in a minute, or with his hat as a participant in equity and therefore a shareholder participant and a shareholder having a seat at the board and entering into shareholder agreements, which is, of course, a very significant step forward if this is the intent that the state of Mauritania is intending to take for this project. So with these two hats, which the law will determine the way forward, I think it's important for the state to make a wise decision given the amounts at stake and the revenue that can be generated upfront.
Thank you. Ahmed, how about in Egypt? Is the government considering sort of participating in projects there, and or are there other ways that you're looking at securing benefits in the long term?
First, maybe all now in the world we in learning curve. The Egyptian government seeking to secure revenue by the green hydrogen project by participating in the share of this project, share 15%. This is divided between 10% in the sovereign fund of Egypt and another 5% with the Egyptian electricity transmission company. I think this is a fair safety percentage for in this time, and maybe the all developers responsible for getting the off-taker and the certificate in this. This is the issue in Egypt.
Thank you, Ahmed. wanted to, well, see, we are running a bit out of time, and I also wanted to hear from Olivier in particular around the ongoing work on the legislation here, or the code here in Mauritania, and the process around that. Just looking if anyone had questions they wanted to, or comments. Feel free to agree or disagree with any of us. I'll start with Mohammed and then Alexander.
Thanks. Regarding what is the best practice for the procedure to come up with incentive? As you know that incentive in each country, it will be different based on the lot of calculation. And you have to study what is the benefit, how much it costs to the country, and how much it costs to the developer itself. And is there any procedure or recommended action to take in consideration when you are going to come up with this incentive? And also, how can this incentive take in consideration the size of project? Project of 100 megawatt is different than project with 10 gigawatt. Incentive should be taken in consideration the size. And the size of project is very important in this. Thanks.
De ce projet.
Thank you.
Je vous remercie.
I was intrigued and interested by the reference being made to the LNG industry.
Donc je suis.
And the notion that the state would take.
Je vous remercie pour ces éclaircissements liés à la fiscalité. Comment peut-on donc essayer si vous avez donc cette transformation de courant, donc on peut considérer ces projets comme les projets d'hydrogène comme donc des projets qui sont exécutés, pleinement exécutés, ou essayer de voir différents segments dans ce contexte. Donc comment le gouvernement va participer dans cette thématique.
Getting ready to, yeah, do you want, oh yes, sorry, I didn't see that.
French.
Ils ont dit 10% de redevance. C'est quoi ça? Ça vient d'où? Qui ça?
Quelqu'un qui est venu enregistrer.
Ah, d'accord. C'est officiel.
Continue à parler.
En fonction de...
جاب لنا جهاز وداروا انه يسجل يبان. الو السلام عليكم ورحمه الله. احمد
Les taxes sont libres. Donc, ils commencent à appliquer des taxes à partir de
قلادة ندير لك قلادة ونجيبها لنا واحد.
All the way to the ultimate delivery to the customer in Germany, right? So from your wind, solar, hydrolyzers, green hydrogen, green ammonia, export facilities, and all of that delivery in Germany. Because if you don't do that, you're investing in a segment of the project without any certainty or knowledge or control over what is happening in other segments of the project. I am sure that there are multiple examples of segregated projects that have been done around the world. But I think the larger the project, as you see in these projects, the larger the project, I think the more difficult it is to do a segregated project. But coming back to a particular question, where does the government fit in? I had a spirited discussion with my colleague and friend here, Olivier, about that issue. Now, it sounds easy to create special purpose entities that may raise their own financing for the power, for the infrastructure, for the hydrogen, etc., etc. And then to say the state will participate in one or more, but not all, of these projects. But the problem is that there is a misalignment of interest, right? And in reality, when the lenders look at these projects, I think they run a completion test on the project on a fully integrated basis. Like, I don't want to provide a debt of $1 billion for your wind and solar facilities when I know that you need them to export green hydrogen to Germany, but I don't know what your green hydrogen project looks like because you are only coming with an SPV for the power facilities, if you see what I mean. And that becomes very, very difficult. And some lenders will just tell you, and I think even from your own perspective, the project-on-project risk is too great if you are not controlling it. You need to make sure that you have line of sight from upstream to downstream to be able to deliver a fully integrated project. And from the perspective of the state, I know it is tempting to focus on power because that is something that is really needed on a local basis to drive and galvanize and accelerate economic growth in the country. But you have to understand that the project has multiple components. They said the sum of the parts is better than the whole because, to be honest, without each and every of that component effectively done, you cannot really realize your green hydrogen dream. So I think it is very hard for the state to segregate these projects and even for the developer to break them down into different components and have different entities participating in different SPVs, because that is the perfect risk for misalignment of interest, which will lead to project-on-project risk, and I don't think you are going to be able to deliver or deliver on time those projects. That's my 2 cents take on the issue. I think there's a 10% question that should be answered by Ahmed because it is more specific to Egypt. But I'll pass it to
Yeah, just one thing. This project is about transforming electrons to molecules. And therefore, it shall not be seen as an IPP selling electricity under a corporate PPA to an entity buying that power in order to produce hydrogen, because there cannot be any collateral provided by those SPV to repay and secure the payments that are expected by XYZ project company. So I sort of agree with Clément that it should be looked at on an
without being segregated and being stopped by the balance sheet of several project companies.
I hope I heard your question good.
J'espère que j'ai bien entendu ta question.
The percentage, this is a percentage for participation in the share of the project.
10%, c'est ce qui participe au projet.
Incentives is another issue we have. We'll announce about the user factor of the renewable energy land and user factor of the downstream, and maybe the custom taxes, some incentives. This is okay.
Just let me come back on one point. I think there is the question of infrastructure.
Il y a une question qui est relative à l'infrastructure.
And I think there is room there, not for desegregating the project, but for
c'est pas pour désagréger le projet, mais pas pour partager certaines choses. Vous pouvez vous asseoir ensemble. Avec d'autres développeurs et le gouvernement, vous devez vous asseoir ensemble et décider. Et ça, c'est un projet intégré. De l'amont en aval, vous allez planifier ensemble et voir un peu les coûts et les meilleures pratiques pour améliorer. Et les difficultés sont soulevées dès le départ, parce que ça, c'est des projets naissants. Vous pouvez vous inspirer vous-même en regardant un peu les deux projets qui ont été développés, même si c'est dans d'autres domaines, et essayer de faire face à des questions similaires. Par exemple, si par exemple le projet total 25 milliards de dollars, donc vous pouvez un peu sortir du cadre usuel.
The scale of what they need to do to deliver the project to the country is so massive that
donc ce qu'il faut faire, c'est vraiment très important. Donc on ne va pas regarder un peu le revenu immédiat, mais l'exécution de ce projet, ce qu'il va rapporter dans le pays.
So going back to the incentive, so and maybe that's a very straight line approach. But
je pense que c'est une approche directe.
We strongly believe that incentives is something that should be
Nous pensons que les incitations sont
the fit for purpose, and I like your topic, fit for purpose for the incentive needs to be investigated. So if we, for instance, talk about
quand on parle de localisation des citations,
if you achieve certain levels of localization, or are we
quand
talking
on
about
achève
the
certaines
working
localisations,
opportunity tax credit, for instance,
surtout
in your
quand vous
employment
parlez
and if you
dans le régime d'emploi.
It really matters that much how big the project is.
Donc il faut donc encore mesurer le projet, la dimension de ce projet.
If you structure it well, your project size might be more efficient with bigger projects in order to achieve certain levels of industrialization and localization.
Si vous avez encore des objectifs d'industrialisation, ça dépend de la dimension donc, du size de ce projet. Est-ce que c'est un projet d'envergure ou un petit projet? Je pense qu'il y a plusieurs exemples. Je voudrais revenir un peu sur la flexibilité. Le premier projet donc sera toujours enveloppé dans une atmosphère d'incertitude. Donc, il faut l'installer dans un cadre avec une série d'agences et avec un écosystème qui vont donc tirer profit de ce. Donc je pense que ce ne sera pas donc facile avec le régime de fiscalité au départ. Donc si vous regardez le régime en Espagne, de fiscalité, après l'installation de l'énergie, donc il a subi beaucoup de changements, beaucoup de modifications. Nous avons donc des agents de développement qui prennent des risques. Nous avons donc il y a plusieurs étapes qui sont impliquées, qu'il faut. Donc, il y a plusieurs. Donc, nous sommes en train d'appliquer certaines mesures pour vraiment éviter de se retrouver devant des cours internationaux. Merci pour vos idées. Nous avons déjà reçu une alerte d'Ahmed Salem nous notifiant du temps. Donc ce sera la dernière question. Pour un peu approfondir la discussion sur la réglementation fiscale en Mauritanie. Est-ce que le volet
Thank you very much. And probably if you don't mind, just take a step back and talk a little bit about the draft legislation that is coming up, because shared infrastructure are the idea is to tackle that issue of draft legislation. I've been bumping into many people, many of you since yesterday.
Donc j'ai discuté avec plusieurs participants depuis hier.
We have to be very humble with this piece of legislation.
Donc on doit être un peu modeste avec ce document de réglementation.
And we don't pretend to reinvent the wheel in terms of putting things together, but we're very keen to set up a dedicated European Union task force to be embarked into that initiative of putting together a draft hydrogen code.
Donc nous sommes en train de travailler ensemble pour élaborer ce code d'hydrogène. En tant que juriste, j'ai participé. Donc nous avons plusieurs objectifs. Nous voulons être sûrs avec cette loi que ce code va en ligne droite avec la réglementation en vigueur. Donc surtout en matière d'énergie, l'environnement, surtout pour dans le respect de l'environnement. Donc je pense que ce projet de réglementation est-ce que ça va être... donc, je pense que nous avons détaillé tous ces points dans ce code. Donc, je pense que ces réglementations sont dédiées, je pense que la réglementation européenne sera tenue en compte dans ce code. Donc, je pense que toutes ces notions de qualité d'hydrogène et de ces projets encore doivent donc marquer ces projets. Donc, je pense que ce sont des outils très importants qui doivent être donc tenus en compte par donc en matière de taxes et de clientèle. Donc, nous nous référons aux conventions globales internationales pour déterminer, pour choisir, opter pour le régime fiscal. Je pense que le partage de l'infrastructure est une question problématique qui a été largement débattue. Donc, c'est largement discuté entre les actionnaires. Donc, que chacun joue pleinement son rôle, y inclut l'État, tout en respectant les réglementations. Donc, est-ce que vous voulez parler encore de cette infrastructure? Merci, Olivier. Donc, le partage de ces infrastructures, ce n'est pas une notion nouvelle. Surtout dans l'industrie, mais je pense, quand on parle de ports, de terminal d'export, donc c'est une opportunité pour ces investisseurs et ces développeurs pour donc avoir l'accord sur les conventions, la construction. Ce n'est pas quelque chose de nouveau. Ce sera donc une opportunité de réduire les coûts. Évidemment, vous allez voir ces expériences qui sont déjà donc mises en œuvre dans plusieurs parties du monde. Je vous remercie. Monsieur Ahmed, vous, en Égypte, vous avez parlé un peu d'infrastructures. Est-ce que vous avez une idée sur ça? Donc, il y a deux parties en Égypte, upstream et downstream. Donc, nous avons cette manière de transfert du upstream. Et nous sommes en train d'y inclure la gestion de canal de Suez et les ports qui donc sera mis à la disposition de tous les développeurs. Je vous remercie.
Je pense que nous allons acheminer vers la fin de ce... Nous pouvons parler de difficultés qui sont relatives à l'hydrogène vert. Nous essayons de voir un peu quels sont les mécanismes d'évaluation. Quand nous parlons de ces projets-là, n'oublions pas qu'il y a des risques qui sont relatifs à l'exécution d'un projet. même si vous les mettiez de côté, même si vous mettez les misques de l'hydrogène vert à côté, vous devez faire face à des risques qui sont relatifs à l'exécution de n'importe quel projet. Je suis au canal de Suez en Égypte. Nous avons des infrastructures significatives. Si vous... ce n'est pas vraiment avoir une mauvaise intention ou quoi que ce soit, mais les infrastructures sont à développer d'abord. Il y a d'autres encore risques relatifs qu'il faut discuter, qui sont vraiment uniques à l'Afrique, au continent africain, parce qu'il y a des risques additionnels qui sont là, qui sont liés à l'infrastructure et autres, en plus de risques de projet. Merci. Je veux remercier tous les panélistes pour ce message final que vous avez donné. Je recommande le gouvernement mauritanien je pense que c'est une première expérience. C'est une expérience qui n'a pas été vécue dans d'autres parties. Je pense que l'Égypte d'Exit était un exemple important. Donc, gestion des risques, c'est quelque chose d'extrêmement important. Margaret, je vais commencer par vous pour nous donner votre dernier message. Ce que nous réalisons, ce qui est valable pour un régime n'est pas valable pour les autres. Pour la Mauritanie, pour Namibie, pour l'Égypte, nous devons trouver un régime qui est proportionnel au pays. Et nous ne travaillons pas pour des ressources exhaustives. Nous parlons des industries qui, après avoir exécuté un projet, nous avons des choses qui sont encore sur place. Et ceci est valable pour les développeurs et pour le gouvernement. L'histoire de développement des ressources et toute la monétarisation de ces ressources et la gestion de tous les revenus, c'est vraiment un voyage long. Les développeurs peuvent soutenir nos gouvernements mauritanien. Et la Mauritanie peut, si vous regardez le Moyen-Orient, c'est un exemple très fascinant, comment les pays ont pris leurs ressources et développent eux-mêmes. Et pendant toute une durée, pendant trentaine d'années, j'ai eu l'occasion de travailler dans mes fermes et dont les travailleurs partent en Moyen-Orient pour s'inspirer des projets, parce que le Middle East, le Moyen-Orient, c'est une source d'inspiration dans ce domaine. Pourquoi nous, les Africains, ne sommes pas capables de faire cela? Donc, mes remarques, pour les énergies renouvelables, nous avons commencé par les CAPEX. C'est des projets transformables jusqu'aux projets bancables. Et donc, avec un soutien approprié du gouvernement, on peut aussi annoncer une nouvelle industrie pour apporter amener les économies des pays à un niveau supérieur. Merci beaucoup. C'est des applaudissements pour les panélistes. Je vais demander à Djabri et le prochain panel d'être présent, de se mettre en place pendant que le Djabri et les panélistes se mettent en place. Est-ce que vous avez une question? J'ai un commentaire par rapport des infrastructures partagées. Ce que le pays doit faire, c'est une distinction qui a été faite entre l'Égypte et mettre des infrastructures en place, comme des places comme la Mauritanie où vous allez quand même construire de nouvelles infrastructures. C'est comme si vous comparez vous-même aux propriétés de développement et vous parlez par exemple, c'est comme si vous pouvez mettre d'abord comment ameubler, mettre en place les ameublements d'une maison que vous n'avez pas encore construite. Je pense que des pays comme la Mauritanie doivent d'abord avoir une société d'infrastructures, donc des véhicules permanents, et doivent mettre en place de l'argent pour développer ces infrastructures d'abord. Et ils ne doivent pas donner cette tâche aux développeurs privés. On parle de projet et de risque de projet. Le projet hydrogène, je dois d'abord construire des ports, des pipelines. Si ces choses n'existent pas, si le pays n'est pas encore prêt à réfléchir à ces choses, je pense que ces choses-là doivent être en place d'abord avant de penser au projet lui-même. Et on doit mobiliser les capitales d'abord. Et si moi, en tant que propriétaire d'une maison, je ne peux pas la louer si je n'ai pas la maison elle-même. Et si vous allez au Moyen-Orient, et si vous, Nakil ou Imar, toutes ces sociétés sont des sociétés de l'État. Ils sont listés, ils mettent de l'argent de côté, ils ont mis en place des infrastructures. Et après, maintenant, ils ont pris des développeurs qui sont venus développer. C'est parti, même en Égypte, ils ont d'abord financé des infrastructures de base et après, ils ont appelé des développeurs pour développer des choses. Donc, il faut mettre en place d'abord des infrastructures de base. Je vais finir vite. C'est la Banque africaine de développement. J'ai l'opportunité de poser des questions. Savez-vous que l'hydrogène, c'est une énergie nouvelle qui va bénéficier non seulement pour les producteurs, mais aussi à tout le monde? Est-ce qu'il y a un financement international qui implique un peu l'hydrogène et qui n'a pas mis en place des infrastructures? Est-ce que je me demandais s'il y a un mécanisme international international. C'est une très bonne question. Comme vous êtes... Est-ce que c'est une question ou un commentaire? C'est un commentaire. Commentaire par rapport à qui est la Banque africaine de développement. C'est un commentaire intéressant. Nous avons déjà identifié des infrastructures et nous sommes en train de travailler avec la Banque mondiale pour identifier ce dont le besoin. Oui. Quelles sont les meilleures options pour construire? Nous ne sommes pas dans le mode pour financer. Nous avons identifié les meilleures options, mais peut-être des systèmes. Nous sommes en train de faire des études pour voir un peu quels sont les besoins qu'il faut mettre en place. Nous sommes au courant de tous ces risques de projets. Nous n'allons pas nous mettre devant cette situation. Nous n'allons pas créer d'autres risques. Nous allons mettre tous les paramètres à nos côtés. Je pense que c'est une conversation qui continue. Je pense que c'est des plateformes qui peuvent continuer et pour partager un peu ce qui se passe en Égypte et un peu partout dans le monde. Et peut-être un mécanisme de financement international. La session est extrêmement importante. Et Djabira et les autres panélistes, on vous demande de vous mettre en place.